On May 21, 1924, a pair of custom-made eyeglasses found near a remote culvert in Hegevish, Illinois, shattered a seemingly perfect crime. 14-year-old Bobby Franks had been abducted and brutally murdered in broad daylight, his body hastily concealed in a drainage pipe south of Chicago. Investigators initially possessed no leads, but the unique prescription hinge on those discarded spectacles traced directly back to 19-year-old Nathan Leopold, an intellectually gifted university graduate from an influential family. When brought in for questioning, Nathan Leopold presented a tight alibi alongside his 18-year-old companion, Richard Loeb, the youngest graduate in the history of the University of Michigan. However, intense police interrogation and meticulous cross-referencing of typewriter impression evidence soon unraveled their story. Confronted with physical evidence that contradicted their timelines, both young men confessed to the kidnapping and murder, detailing a cold, calculated plot executed purely for the intellectual thrill of committing an undetectable crime. The brutal nature of the crime and the absolute lack of remorse shocked the public. Driven by an obsession with Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy of the Übermensch, or concept of an elite individual existing above societal morality, Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb viewed themselves as superior beings exempt from human law. State prosecutor Robert Crowe demanded the death penalty by hanging, supported by an outraged populace expecting a swift trial that would end on the scaffold for both defendants. Faced with overwhelming evidence and signed confessions, the defense team appeared to have no viable legal path toward acquittal. Famed defense attorney Clarence Darrow took the case, making a calculated decision that would forever alter the American legal system. Rather than entering a traditional plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, which would have required a jury trial under Illinois law, Clarence Darrow instructed both young men to plead guilty directly before a single magistrate, Judge John R. Caverly. This procedural maneuver shifted the proceedings entirely from a guilt determination phase to a sentencing hearing, where the rules regarding exculpatory evidence and mitigating factors were significantly broader. Exculpatory evidence refers to any material or testimony that favors the defendant by mitigating guilt or reducing punishment. Clarence Darrow realized that while a jury would almost certainly vote for execution, a single judge might listen to pioneering medical and psychiatric insights regarding human behavior and culpability. To build his mitigation strategy, Clarence Darrow enlisted prominent alienists, the contemporary term for psychiatrists who specialized in treating mental illnesses and evaluating mental competency. Doctors William A. White and Bernard Gluck spent over 80 hours conducting exhaustive psychological examinations of both defendants. Their goal was not to establish legal insanity, which required proving the defendants could not distinguish right from wrong, but to demonstrate that their mental faculties were profoundly disordered and immature. The psychiatric evaluations revealed deep psychological abnormalities masked by high intelligence quotient scores. Nathan Leopold suffered from severe emotional detachment and an unhealthy pathological obsession with Richard Loeb, while Loeb exhibited severe personality fragmentation, persistent grandiose delusions, and a compulsive urge to commit criminal acts. The alienists documented how these underlying psychiatric pathologies converged, creating a lethal dynamic where neither youth functioned as a rational adult actor. When the defense called these medical experts to the stand, prosecutor Robert Crowe objected fiercely, asserting that psychiatric testimony had no place in a court of law when the defendants were admittedly sane under statutory definitions. Judge Caverly, however, made a landmark evidentiary ruling allowing the comprehensive psychiatric evaluations to be entered into the record. For the first time in an American courtroom, state-of-the-art mental health evaluations were formally presented to explain why a crime occurred, rather than whether the perpetrators knew right from wrong. The defense presented voluminous medical charts, endocrine test results, and childhood developmental histories to demonstrate that biological and environmental factors had warped the emotional development of the defendants. Expert testimony detailed how severe emotional repression and pathological narcissism can coexist with brilliant intellect, rendering an individual incapable of feeling normal human empathy. This scientific framework challenged the ancient legal assumption that all conscious acts are born of pure free will. During cross-examination, the prosecution brought in its own medical experts to counter the defense claims, sparking a fierce clash of scientific interpretations. State alienists argued that Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb were fully aware of their actions, calculating every detail of the murder with cold rationality. This battle of expert witnesses highlighted the deep rift between traditional legal moralism, which demanded retributive justice, and emerging psychiatric science, which viewed criminal behavior through the lens of psychological determinism. Clarence Darrow delivered a historic 12-hour closing argument that integrated these psychiatric findings into a powerful philosophical indictment of capital punishment. He argued that human behavior is the complex product of heredity, environmental influences, and subconscious drives beyond individual control. By framing the defendant's warped mentalities as an illness requiring understanding rather than a moral failing requiring death, Darrow urged the court to choose mercy informed by science. On September 10, 1924, Judge John R. Caverly delivered his sentence. While stating that the psychiatric testimony did not establish legal irresponsibility, he explicitly cited the youth and disordered mental states of the defendants as mitigating factors. Leopold and Loeb were spared the gallows, sentenced instead to life imprisonment plus 99 years for the kidnapping and murder. The ruling marked a monumental shift, proving that psychiatric evidence could successfully influence judicial sentencing in high-stakes capital cases. The outcome of the trial reverberated across the legal landscape, permanently transforming how courts approached mental illness, criminal intent, and sentencing. Prior to 1924, psychiatric testimony in criminal trials was largely restricted to the rigid boundaries of the Monckton Rule, an 1843 legal standard that defined insanity solely by a defendant's cognitive ability to discern right from wrong at the moment of the offense. The precedents established in Chicago introduced the concept of diminished capacity into the legal system. This legal doctrine recognizes that mental disease or defect, while not meeting the strict threshold for total legal insanity, can still impair a defendant's capacity to form specific intent or appreciate the full moral gravity of an act. Consequently, courts across the nation began accepting expert psychiatric testimony during both trial and sentencing phases. Despite its monumental success, the introduction of courtroom psychiatry also introduced lasting complexities and legal ambiguities. Critics argued that allowing expert witnesses to debate subjective mental states blurred the boundary between legal accountability and medical diagnosis. The rise of conflicting expert testimonies, often referred to as a battle of the experts, raised persistent questions regarding the objectivity and reliability of scientific opinion within an adversarial court system. Over the subsequent decades, the integration of behavioral science into criminal justice expanded rapidly, paving the way for modern forensic psychiatry and standardized diagnostic manuals. The forensic evaluation of criminal offenders shifted from crude character assessments to rigorous multidisciplinary investigations involving clinical interviews, psychometric testing, and neurobiological profiling, establishing a new standard for evidentiary rigor in judicial proceedings. Today, the legacy of the Leopold and Loeb trial endures as the foundational moment where forensic science met the human mind in the legal arena. By allowing psychiatric testimony to illuminate the complex interior lives of the accused, Clarence Darrow and Judge John R. Caverly established that true justice requires an understanding not only of the physical evidence behind a crime, but of the psychological forces that drove it.